Let me start with a brief mea culpa. I know that the last video went headlong into some fairly heady material. There is a lot to unpack here, and, for me, very little time to do it in. And I may have assumed a little too much about my audience's patience or appetite for theology, for semiotics, and for meta-narrative. That's on me. But let's be honest. No amount of clarification, no number of hours, and no mountain of citations would ever be enough for some people. When a culture is thoroughly saturated in propaganda, when the lies have marinated long enough to feel like a personality, any countercultural claim is going to feel like an act of violence. So I'm not surprised that some of the responses to last video were less about argument and more about emotional convulsion. But that's the point. Propaganda is not just about persuasion, it's about transformation. It doesn't just tell you what to think, it tells you who you are. And when that identity is challenged, people don't debate, they lash out. So if you came away from the last video angry, ask yourself this. Why? Why does an analytical essay about a video game hit you in the gut like a heresy trial? Perhaps the real subject isn't just Stellar Blade, maybe it's you. Part of the reason I'm doing this follow-up is because people close to me, people I actually respect, urged me to. And no, I do not live in an echo chamber. Some of my friends and peers disagree with me, often sharply, and that's good. It keeps me honest, it forces me to clarify instead of calcify. In this case, I was told, fairly, that there were simply too many variables left hanging, too much room between the author's intent, or lack thereof, cultural context, and what a modern audience interprets as progressive. The leap from transhumanist themes to the trans movement felt like a stretch to some. But to me, it wasn't a leap. It was a slope, a slippery, meticulously greased one. And if I'm going to make that slope visible, I need to explain, carefully and in full.
Civilization as we know it came to an end. Look around you, a planet where only Natibas remain. Remember, at the beginning and the end of the final war, his mother sphere. Do not forget. We were just pawns on a twisted chessboard.
That's impossible.
Raven is delusional.
It's the Nativa's fault the Earth is in ruins. We're not just machines someone created.
Right? Eve? Please, tell me I'm right.
The moment Eve and Lily discover they aren't human but androids isn't just a narrative twist. It's the linchpin of the progressive framework embedded in the game's very DNA. It's the moment the veil lifts and with it comes the reframing of all authority. Mother Sphere, the colony, tradition itself. It is all depicted as unnatural, as artificial. It's all a lie. But that is textbook progressive mythology. You see, you are not broken because you're flawed, you're broken because you were lied to. So all your social constructs, male, female, parent, purpose, they're all cages. But the realization of one's true self comes not by aligning with order, but by rejecting it as fraud. So truth becomes the lie. Therefore, Mother Sphere, the colony, all these narrative stand-ins for traditionalism, for conservatism, they become the enemy. And it's not coincidental that this revelation precedes the fight with Raven here, because she too has escaped the narrative. And she affirms the very logic the player is now being inducted into, transcending your programming, abandoning the old roles as assigned by society, and thereby destroying the author, killing God.
Raven. Eve. I knew from the very beginning that all along I was nothing but a tool to guide you to him. Even the legacies I left behind became part of the plan. I should congratulate you for realizing the truth and making it this far. Of course, you won't be able to see him.
Shut up! Don't you dare talk about truth after what you did to Taki!
Can't you see? It was Mother Spear who deceived us. You would have remained ignorant if not for him. I served him for a very long time. I know him better than anyone. You don't know anything. You don't know his pain, his anger, his agony. All this talk of you being the chosen one, it ends here. I can't believe I have to come in this form. The body of a superweapon. But him. There is an unspoken truth you don't dare acknowledge. Do you think you're just going to complete your mission and head back to the colony? A hero? Unfortunately, you've learned too much. You can't be manipulated anymore. And the information you've gained is no use to Mother Sphere or the colony. Why are you hesitating? Because we were comrades? Or because I'm human like you?
So this isn't just a boss fight here, this is a ritual exit from tradition. The confrontation with Raven brings this into sharp relief. Her words are not just personal attacks against Eve, they are ideological assertion. Raven speaks as a prophet of liberation, positioning herself as the one who has already cast off the vestiges of the colony and Mother Sphere, symbols of tradition, authority, and constraint. Her rejection of these conservative moorings is framed as emancipation, as truth, and the game leans into this. In its own way, it rehearses the standard liturgy of modern liberation narratives, that the structures that once defined and ordered human life, family, sex, kinship, the divine, are inherently oppressive. To call someone mother or sister or man or woman is, in this framework, to confine them. In leftist progressive ideologues, these are not relational vocations. They are considered to be cages. And so in Stellar Blade, the only path forward is through choice, the most sacred word of the progressive catechism. Autonomy, self-definition, the act of declaring I am what I will be. The vision maps neatly onto Marxist and post-Marxist critiques of society. It assumes that the family, religion, and sexuality are not gifts from God, but instruments of domination, tools by which power is inscribed onto bodies. In this schema, even capitalism becomes suspect because it reduces all relationships to transactions and all identities to marketable products. The human being, therefore, becomes either consumer or commodity. And here, in that strange flashpoint where theory meets flesh, we find transgenderism, no longer merely a medical or social phenomenon, but the ultimate symbolic gesture of rebellion. To transition is to declare oneself the other par excellence, neither male nor female, not bounded by nature, biology, or God. Instead, a trans person becomes the embodied protest against categorization itself, a refusal to be named by anyone but the self. It is also in this context why it's not hard to see why some activists, far beyond the medical or psychological mainstream, seek to dismantle even the distinctions between adult and child. For if sex is no longer about procreation, but simply another consumer good, a chemical pleasure to be optimized and abstracted from consequence, then the remaining taboos, age, relation, consent, are just more constructs to be deconstructed. Therefore, child and adult become oppressive categories in the same way man and woman once were. Stellar Blade, then, dances uncomfortably close to those currents. It does not fully endorse them, but it draws its power from the same metaphysical engine, the longing to transcend given nature, to self-create, and to escape the authority of anything that came before. The drive to transcend created order, to rise above the limits of flesh, kinship, and divine ordinance, finds not only the echoes of Marxist materialism or liberal autonomy, but also a strange resonance in the esoteric currents of Kabbalistic mysticism. Within certain strange of Jewish Kabbalah, particularly Lurianic, the concept of Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world, is rooted in a cosmic drama where the original vessels of divine light shattered, scattering divine sparks across creation. Humanity's spiritual task, then, is to gather and elevate those sparks through acts of awareness, ritual, and mystical union. In some interpretations, this culminates in a return to the primordial androgyny, a reunification of male and female principles once split in the fall from unity. Adam Cadman, the primordial man, is not merely male, but the totality, containing both masculine and feminine attributes before division. The story of Eve and Adam reuniting in Stellar Blade, not through romance, but through fusion, evokes this return to an androgynous whole. So what was split must be made whole again, not through covenant, but through synthesis. This is not Christianity. It is not resurrection. It is reintegration. It is not a theology of grace, but of ascent. Gnosis, not faith. The emphasis is not on the God who calls creation good and restores it, but on the spark of divinity that is supposedly buried within all of us, waiting to be liberated from the material order itself. And so Stellar Blade begins to hum in tune with a strange spiritual polyphony, equal parts progressive rebellion, Marxist anthropology, and esoteric mysticism. Christianity offers a radically different alternative, that the body, the categories, the relations, male and female, mother and child, creator and creature, are not prisons but gifts, not illusions to be overcome but realities to be redeemed. The gospel does not seek to escape the world, but to restore it. But in Stellar Blade, intentionally or not, courts the temptation of a different gospel. Now let's briefly talk about the character Raven in Stellar Blade. Raven, whose sleek menace and tragic edge have drawn inevitable comparisons to Lilith, the supposed first woman, rejected for refusing submission. In some apocryphal Jewish folklore, Lilith was Adam's original wife, created as his equal but cast out for her defiance. She is remade in later mysticism as the night demon, the mother of monsters, the seductress who defied divine order. It is no coincidence, then, that Raven carries the same fire, a woman unbound by loyalty, animated by vengeance, and cloaked in a sovereign autonomy. She is what Eve might have become had she not been chosen, or rather had she been chosen differently. But this is not a biblical story. The Christian scriptures know no Lilith, not in any canonical sense. The sole reference in Isaiah chapter 34 verse 14 uses the Hebrew word lilith, which may refer to a desert owl or a night creature, but not a theological archetype. The Lilith mythos is just a later development, emerging from Babylonian demonology and flowering in medieval Jewish mysticism, particularly in the alphabet of Ben Sira, a satirical and non-canonical text that eventually fed into the Zohar and Kabbalistic tradition. So when Stellar Blade gives us Raven, a being literally encoded with the Eve protocol, a cast-off model, wrathful and destructive, it's not drawing from the well of Christian theology, but from an alternative spiritual current. Regardless, Raven becomes a kind of synthetic Lilith. The one who came first, the one rejected, and the one who would not conform to the divine plan. She is the spiritual twin of the Gnostic Sophia, trapped, angry, and broken. And her failure is framed not in terms of sin, but incompatibility with salvation. Eve, by contrast, is the new Eve, not by virtue of humility or faith, but by successful synthesis. And she only becomes whole because she fuses with Adam. But this is not marriage. This is a union, but it is not a covenant. And therefore, this is not a Christian allegory. It's something else. In the end, this means Stellar Blade spins an alternate gospel, one built not on the self-emptying love of Christ, but the self-constructing ambition of man, not the redemption of creation, but its transcendence, not on the Logos made flesh, but the flesh made obsolete. Another point I should have addressed in the last video was that my whole analysis was presented as exegetical. In plain terms, that means I was drawing meaning from the text itself, in this case the game, rather than just regurgitating what the developers publicly claimed they were trying to say through the game. Now, this distinction tends to fly over most heads on YouTube, where people are conditioned to think that unless a writer slaps a rainbow flag on the screen and gives a TED talk about it afterward, then there's no message at all. But ideology doesn't need to be announced. It reveals itself through patterns, themes, framing, what Latina Parfait rightly called pattern recognition in his debate with Fratanga. Kane's Games also gets this, and of course, so does Synthetic Man. The idea that only authorial intent matters is reductive. Whether consciously or not, creators transmit what they believe through their work. So for those waiting for a press release to confirm what they're seeing, this kind of analysis probably isn't for you. But for everyone else who recognizes the messaging without waiting for the branding, that's where exegesis comes in. Another thing about Stellar Blade, yes, I know this all comes from Korea. So it must be Eastern, not Western, right? Culturally distinct, totally removed from all that Western baggage, right? Wrong. What we're seeing in Stellar Blade is not some isolated Confucian artifact. It is steeped in Jewish mystical thought. Not Torah Judaism, mind you. This is late-stage Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, Gnosticism, the sort of apocryphal metaphysics that bled into modern esotericism and then trickled sideways into pop culture through 1,000 open and unacknowledged channels. You think that the Korean demographic being Christian means they all carry the same theological assumptions? Look around you. Does Christianity in America function that way? Of course not. You can find a church on every corner and still not find one that believes in biblical authority. So why assume that South Korea, one of the most hyper-feminized nations in the developed world, is somehow more doctrinally solid? A lot of contemporary Christian theology, especially in globalized media context, has quietly inherited Jewish philosophical frameworks. Some of it is Gnostic, some of it is Kabbalistic. Most of it is subconscious, but it's real, and Stellar Blade swims in it. Ignore the geography, follow the metaphysics. And something else I want to make clear here. I am not a capitalist absolutist. As traditional as I am, I do not believe in the uncritical commodification of humanity, the kind that turns every soul into a data point and every desire into a subscription model. But I also don't see any issue with free market capitalism when, and this is the key, it is governed by Christian theological moorings. Because ultimately true freedom is not found in the secular illusion of autonomy. That kind of freedom just hands you over to every appetite, every trend, and every algorithm that pretends to serve you, but quietly enslaves you. No real freedom is found only in unity with Christ. Everything else is dressed up bondage masquerading as liberation. If you are not bound to Christ, you are not free. You are just a slave to the world dressed in the costume of autonomy. The chains are still there. They're just rebranded as self-expression. Anyway, one of the things that confirms to me that Stellar Blade is transcoded is something a compatriot of mine, Carl Sama, pointed out. Sex sells. Of course. Very simple, but he's right. And let's be precise. It's not sex in the sense of real intimacy or covenantal union. What sells is a curated facsimile, lust, stripped of meaning and marketed as desire. It's a counterfeit of romance. As was mentioned with Tolkien's line about evil's inability to create and only to corrupt, this too is a corruption. Modernity has taken romantic love and hollowed it out, leaving only yearning. Eve's body is therefore sexualized, but she herself remains eerily oblivious to it. An android draped in seduction, yet divorced from the awareness of it. This is not an oversight. According to the game's director, this is part of who she is. This is a statement. And this is really what drives the market today. Not fulfillment, but yearning. Endless yearning. Unresolved, unconsummated, longing dressed up as satisfaction. Every thumbnail, every YouTube title, every purchase of Stellar Blade promises something it cannot deliver. It is not designed to fulfill you. It is designed to replace what would. That is the brutal truth. And it's the same engine fueling the parasocial economy. Your favorite VTubers. That OnlyFans girl you've convinced yourself gets you. The waifu you defend on Reddit. None of it is real, but the market has conditioned you to think that this is enough. And your tribe affirms it, so you believe it sustains you. And if this is the world's substitute for real intimacy, then of course, the trans narrative becomes even more lucrative. Because if forging something real, pursuing a woman, raising children, is too difficult, too costly, or too broken, then the world has offered you a shortcut. Why not become trans? If you can't romance a real woman, then you can just romance yourself. This is also why I describe transgenderism as the ultimate form of homosexuality. Homosexuality 2.0, if you will. The original idea behind homosexuality, philosophically speaking, was the search for romantic intimacy with one's perceived equal, someone of the same sex who could mirror and understand you without friction. But transgenderism pushes this further. It doesn't seek understanding, it seeks to become the ideal. It isn't just about loving your equal, it's about embodying your perfect partner. You approximate that one-flesh union from biblical poetry, but instead of covenant, you get collapse. A simulated romance with yourself, a mirror instead of a marriage.